Hello, and welcome again to the Supply Chain Automation Workforce Hub webinar series powered by Manhattan Strategy Group, MSG. I am Kimberly Harris, and I am joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague, Mr. Cori DiBiase. And by now, you know that we have generated several webinars to really help and serve as a toolkit in various facets of the apprenticeship journey, from thinking about strategic demographic data to also leveraging the data that you have and already gather, also thinking about outreach and things of that nature. This time in this series, we're really going to be taking a dive looking at various demographic groups and just thinking about some of the things that should be top of mind as you consider what it is to onboard, to mentor, to provide support, to ensure that your apprentices from all various parts of our communities are able and set up well to contribute and to thrive in the respective work environment. The title of this webinar series is Understanding, Engaging, and Empowering Potential Career Seekers and Participants. And part one, our conversation today, is just going to be an introduction, a quick intro into all that awaits in the subsequent installments that we'll have. Please keep in mind that we do realize that this is not an exhaustive list of things to do, nor is it intended to be an exhausted list of demographic groups. We know that life is life. Work settings are highly contextual, and people are just as contextual and complex as work settings, even more so. So we're just trying to help in the process of thinking through from a strategic standpoint, what things should you be mindful of when really trying to cultivate a mentorship program, also create and maintain and stand up apprenticeship supports that really inform success for apprentices in your work environment. So with that being said, let's get the conversation going. So just a little bit of an overview as to what to expect across the series. We're going to be talking about, as I said before, different participant groups, understanding a little bit about them generationally, and different other characteristics and components. We're going to also be talking about, based upon some of these common characteristics, some of these commonalities, realizing once again, I really cannot emphasize that enough, that this is not intended to be an exhaustive list, but just keeping in mind some things like when we talk about generational group members, Gen Zers, millennials, whomever, or if we're talking about, women in the workforce, or veterans in the workforce, giving you just a little bit of a peek of some of the conversation to come in future webinars in this series. Things that you might want to keep top of mind as you think about engaging, and also as you think about what it means to empower. And also, once again, it's always what it means to evaluate, right? We have been wrapping up many of our webinar series with talking about being very intentional about the role of evaluation to ensure that there is indeed alignment with the outcomes that you intended, that you've outvisioned, and the processes and the steps to get you there. So we're going to have a conversation that includes all of those things, as always. So as we are thinking about the essential elements in crafting apprenticeship for all, there's so many things that we will be talking about, so many things to think about, and also just so many things that this particular webinar series won't cover. But our intent is to set you up to be mindful of those things. And as always, we'll share our contact information at the end. So if there are questions that bubble up as you are looking at this particular series of webinars, please feel free to reach out to our team at the Supply Chain Automation Workforce Hub. So thinking about this, in this particular series, we're going to be talking about various demographics, populations, and groups that can all benefit from apprenticeship programs. And as I said before, we've structured this so that you can be thinking about some of these things and how that then informs needs that we need to be mindful of, the interests, challenges, goals, and strategies that we can use to welcome different community groups, engage them, empower them, and set them up for long-term success in the organization. And so as we kind of move through this series, we're also going to be lifting up things that can help to set the scene, if you will, talking about the characteristics, the statistics, the motivations, the things that really kind of shape these various groups from different perspectives. And once again, we'll be emphasizing a lot the fact that this is not intended to be a one-stop or really an exhaustive discussion on every facet of individuals within these prioritized groups, nor if any webinar or any type of tool aid, I think can successfully do that. What instead this is intended to be is something to help to really reinforce intentionality, to be mindful about some things that can really be helpful as you, as the employer, craft, co-create mentorships and supports that really set up your apprentice population to be successful given the context and realities at your particular organization. So once again, just to reiterate, what are we going to be doing over the course of this particular series? The purpose of this is to understand the demographics and statistics that define and characterize various groups that we'll be lifting up. We'll also cite and talk about and discuss some of the research on the interests and needs and ambitions of these respective groups. We're going to be thinking about, some of the things from an environment and workplace and culture standpoint that have defined and shaped and some of the things that we know about these respective groups. We're going to also talk about some of the employer perspectives and experiences, as well as labor market trends, challenges faced by employers, and also opportunities for growth. So we really are excited to share with you. As always, it's great to be in community and conversation. We look forward to having these conversations with you over the course of the next several slide decks and conversations within the webinar series. And with that, I'll turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Mr. Cori DiBiase, who will pick it up with engaging the participants.
Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you everyone for tuning in for this another wonderful series with my, as Dr. Harris herself says about me, my esteemed colleague, Dr. Harris. Always a pleasure to be working with you and to be speaking with you folks. So just keeping with this theme here, as Kim did say, of course, this is not an exhaustive deep dive on any of these things that we're just kind of doing an introduction here. And you'll find as we go through the series that we're never going to be going deep into any one given practice, talking about, okay, what does this look like if we want our registered apprenticeship to work as well as it possibly can with this recently transitioning veteran or this person with a disability, whoever we're talking about. How do we make sure we're going to do that as well as we possibly can? What are the strategies we can use to engage, empower, understand, as Kim was talking about, the folks we're working with? And as we go forward, so today we'll be talking about these ideas kind of in the abstract, just a laundry list of here are all the tools in our toolbox, even if we don't have time to tell you quite how to use that one particular socket wrench just yet. We're just going to tell you, we're going to inventory all the tools in the toolbox. And then as we get into the real meat of this series, and we're talking about folks, start looking at it through the lens of like, okay, here we are, we're working with a veteran. How does it work to do outreach in that case? What does it mean to do goal setting with someone in this situation? We'll start contextualizing all those pieces. Of course, when we think about what it means to engage anyone, regardless of demographic or any other kind of characteristic, of course, The first things we're thinking about are outreach. Where do we find folks? How do we send a message to the right place, first of all? And how do we make sure we're sending the right message out into our communities to bring in the folks who are most going to benefit from our services, most going to are going to most fully avail themselves of the opportunity that registered apprenticeship offers them. What can we be doing? Working through peer networks, ensuring that there is a positive word of mouth out there in our community, spreading when we're not doing a thing about it. Nonetheless, it is organically spreading in our communities because, again, we found the right folks and the right folks to speak to and the right message to speak to make sure that that's going to start happening. Of course, we're going to talk about assessment. And you're going to say, Cori, we just got done. Kim just got done telling us about all this understanding we're going to do. We're going to talk about demographics and research and firsthand accounts of folks and personal reflections. Great. Absolutely, we're going to do that. But just like we know, I can read, and I've probably read the majority of them, right? I can read every research report out there on engaging veterans in the workforce system or engaging veterans in registered apprenticeship. I can talk about statistics and all those kinds of things. At the end of the day, we're not talking to statistics, right? That's not your job. Your job is to talk to human beings, and that's who you're going to be talking to in this process. And every human being, every individual defies and goes far beyond any of those statistics. So, of course, we're going to talk about what does it mean once we're actually working directly with someone, what does it mean to really understand the whole person and the actual person beyond the statistics, beyond circumstances. We're going to look again at that comprehensive person standing in front of us. We're going to talk about goal setting, right? And how do we set goals in a way, if we're doing case management, if we're working intensively with folks, how do we support someone to set their own goals, to really be creating a path forward that is their vision for their lives that we then support and empower. But of course, as we all know, if I go into this and think, you know what, I know exactly what career Kim is going to be so great at, so I'm just going to get that going. I'm going to get her signed up to this certification. I'm going to get her into this registered apprenticeship. It's going to be so great. She's going to be so happy. Well, maybe I'm right, but of course, I don't tell Kim what Kim's goals are. Kim tells me, right? Kim tells me this is where I want to go. And I say, okay, great. How can I help? What can I do? What can I do in my position to facilitate that? And how do we, beyond, of course, the number one thing in goal setting is always maintaining the career seeker's control in that process, never letting us, even unintentionally, and of course it would be unintentional, but even unintentionally, sort of take the reins away and take that empowerment away. Of course, in addition to that, we want what I like to think of as realistically ambitious goals. This is not Cori's going to be an astronaut kind of goals when he just got done talking but before we started this session with our producer about how, I kind of need some anti-anxiety medication just to get on that plane in the first place. So an astronaut is totally unrealistic. That's not an ambitious goal for Cori. That's a silly goal for Cori. But what can we say? Like, okay, what keeps a sense of ambition and a real push forward while being realistic? How do we do that? How do we support someone to understand what is realistic, even if their conceptions maybe need a little modification as they learn about what this process is going to be? And then finally, in the midst of all that, how are we cultivating optimism? Now, that may sound very abstract. You think, okay, well, outreach, I know about that. Assessment, right. Goal setting, SMART goals, I heard about all that good stuff. Cultivating optimism. Where's the service line? Where's the service code for cultivating optimism? Well, no, this is not a service that we provide, quote unquote. However, this is the underpinning of everything we do. Either we are cultivating in the folks that we're working with a sense that, like, yep, you came to us today, things are not going the way you want them to. There are some barriers, there's some challenges you're struggling with. But guess what? The path forward is upward, and we're here to support you. And you need to have this mentality of, yes, we're heading up now. Things are improving. How do we cultivate that optimism? How do we cultivate a strengths-based notion of the people we work with? And how do we cultivate that within themselves, right? Some of the folks that you work with, I know when they first meet you, they're probably not in their best mindset, right? They're probably not feeling as good about themselves as they could possibly be. And of course, I'm speaking about folks with some of the more significant barriers and challenges. Well, how do we, nonetheless, in the midst of that, build up that notion that, like, no, there is every reason for optimism here. There is every reason for when you, the career seeker, look at yourself in the mirror. There's every reason for you to say, yes, here are my strengths. Here's the strength with which I'm going to move forward in this process and create the life that I want to live with the support of the folks that are supporting me. Continuing with this, of course, we'll talk about what kind of ongoing support someone might need in a registered apprenticeship, in employment, whatever that looks like. Is that accommodations? Is that just flexibility, which is not as as tangible a response necessarily as an accommodation, but sometimes we don't need physical accommodations or a formal change. Sometimes we need just a little bit of flexibility to make things work. How do we use that the right way without also compromising the needs of the apprenticeship, the needs of staff, the needs of an employer? How do we strike a balance where everybody's getting their needs met in this process? Natural supports we'll talk about. Every employment situation, every classroom, every one of every registered apprenticeship, all of these all of these settings are rife with opportunities for support that's already there. The other person in the same class that maybe either struggles with the same thing I do to learn, or maybe they struggle with the exact opposite thing. Maybe the stuff that I find hardest, they think is a breeze, and vice versa. And we just naturally come together and start supporting one another. No staff time, no service intervention needed. Just so how do we in the background kind of cultivate those opportunities? Of course, social support. We'll talk about peer and mentor connections. If you've ever tuned into one of our shows before, you know that we are big fans of peer and mentor aspects here, which of course are integral to all registered apprenticeship. And then finally, negotiation. We know with all these things, certainly with long-term employment, but even again, an apprenticeship or even my presence in a classroom, there's an aspect of negotiation. There's an aspect of how do I make sure my needs as an individual are being met? How do I make sure I'm going to be successful? Doing that in a way that's realistic and that is meeting the needs and honoring the needs and perspective of everyone around me, right? So how do we look at that, and how do we appropriately look for, again, opportunities for accommodations or flexibility or natural supports or any kind of changes that we might need to make to ensure, again, that all sides are going to be as successful as possible. We're going to think about some of the things that we're going to do when we're talking about how do we engage someone, and how do we when we talk about engagement, what we mean is the process of building trust, the process of building a connection, the process of putting yourself as the workforce development professional, the process of putting yourself in a position where I, as the career seeker, can say, you know what, Kim, I trust you to stand next to me, to work with me, to be part of this process, to advise me, to guide me, to support me. I trust you to help me build this life that I want to live. That's a big ask, right? That is not a small thing to trust someone with. But so how do we cultivate that engagement? But again, cultivate it in a way that's not me saying, you know what, as the career seeker, Kim, I trust you. You just figure this out for me. You just tell me what to do. And I'll just sit back and wait. No. Engagement means you got to get me going, right? You've got to get my motivation, my forward momentum moving as well. So what are the strategies for that? Cultivating a recognition of who someone is, what their interests are, what their strengths are. Again, the pieces we talked about, but also a recognition of what are their challenges, what support will they need. How do we, and this is very much related, you can see across the way here, you see trauma-informed care, or trauma-informed services, we sometimes say. Well, how do we establish for me, the first time I come into your office, that I am safe and in control? And that may sound very simple, but we know that depending on where I'm coming from, depending on my perspective, that might not feel simple at all. How do I look at interpersonal dynamics with my supervisor, with an instructor, with my coworkers, with people I'm supervising, with people in a mentorship? How do we look at the way that we interact as human beings to ensure, again, the maximum possible opportunity for success for me and for the folks around me as well? Then we'll look at comprehensive and non-traditional assessments, ways of getting to understand folks that maybe go past the standard interest inventory kind of stuff. Again, we'll be talking about cultivating self-direction, ensuring that individuals are in control of these processes. We will talk again, never, as Kim said, we're never going to go deep enough in any of these things, and we're all going to be a little frustrated by it. But we will try and talk about, in the context of these services, what does it look like to have a trauma-informed perspective, to be thinking about some of the traumatic experiences that someone may or may not have experienced before they meet me. I'm not going to know right away, right? So what do I do to make sure that it doesn't matter whether I know or not what some of Kim's past experiences are? I'm going to still take all the steps I possibly and reasonably can to make sure that, again, she feels safe and in control in my presence and in the process of our program, our protocols, all that kind of good stuff. We're going to talk about motivational interviewing, tapping into what drives folks forward, what will get them focused and moving forward in their goals. Again, peer support, mentorship. We're already talking about that a couple of times, and we'll keep talking about it. And finally, just and this sounds nebulous, and it's intended to be. This is a little vague. This notion of flexibility and customization, this idea that nothing is exactly written in stone, and every now and again, what we're going to do is just try and be a little flexible if we possibly can to again ensure that Cori as the career seeker, Cori as the registered apprenticeship participant, as well as the folks around him and his instructors and his supervisors and his staff support, all these other folks, that all of those folks are having their needs met, even if that means us being flexible sometimes in ways that maybe we wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So all of that, of course, that engagement, that idea of how do I make it clear, or how does Kim, if Kim is supporting me, bring me to the point where I have that level of trust to say, yes, I absolutely accept you as someone who's going to support me in this process, and I'm going to let you in and let that work out here. All that, of course, is necessary before we can get to the point of empowering me as the participant, empowering the registered apprenticeship participant, empowering the candidate, the employee, to really, again, be moving themselves, using their own motivation, moving themselves toward the life that they want to live. So some of the things that we'll be thinking about when we're thinking about empowerment, how, again, do we ensure at the foundational level and at every single instance, every single interaction, that the participant, the career seeker, is driving this process? How do we keep the reins in their hands, even when at times, I might say, as again, I'm speaking from the theoretical participant standpoint here, I might say, you know what, I don't want the reins anymore. Kim, just tell me what to do. I'm overwhelmed. You're the expert. You're the one with all those jobs and opportunities right there in your briefcase. Just open the briefcase and come to me. Tell me what to do. No, of course, we know it can't work that way. The career seeker has to maintain control, but we know how complex that can be. So how do we do that? How do we weave that idea through everything that we do? How do we understand and respond to barriers? And how do we understand and respond to barriers that perhaps we have to remember the participant may view very differently than I do, than we do as the professionals that we're supporting them. Certainly when we would think of something like addiction or substance use, those kinds of ideas. We know that's the notorious example of this, the idea that a barrier is only a barrier if the individual perceives it to be such. Kim might be looking and supporting me and thinking, geez, it really is problematic that every time, every time Cori has an interview, he comes in feeling like maybe he didn't get quite enough sleep last night and maybe had a little too much fun last night. Well, Kim, as the professional on the outside, might perceive that very clearly, helping me understand that, helping me, the individual, understand that, wow, okay, this is a problem. This wasn't just one night out with the boys and maybe it got a little out of control. Well, okay, this is every night. This is a pattern that I need to do something about. I need to be the one, as the participant, to understand that But so what do we do to provide that support in the background there? Looking again at motivational case management, focusing on goals. How do you get me to say, okay, I'm going to find a way to prioritize my 5-year goal for myself, to be in this career, to have this level of income, to be living in this kind of place, to have this kind of car, to have this kind of relationship with my family, which maybe that relationship with my family isn't good right now. How do I maintain my focus on that goal? And as a consequence of that, say, okay, as that means that I got to get some other things in my life in order, and I've got to recognize and accept some support that I might need to make that happen. Again, we can provide the support once someone says, you know what, I recognize this barrier, I recognize this challenge. We can provide the support. The hardest part is often getting to the point of someone understanding that, yes, this support is going to be necessary to you. But again, that has to come from the participant. And that applies, by the way, much more broadly than just issues around, I think the substance use issue is the most straightforward. It applies far more broadly to almost every kind of barrier we can be talking about. But we'll get into that again as we sort of dive into this series. Some other things we're going to be talking about. Again, goal setting, as we've talked about, how do we balance that positivity and reality? How do we be realistically ambitious? How do we ensure, once again, already I'm a broken record about this, how do we ensure those goals are driven by the participant's vision of the life they want to lead? How do we cultivate momentum? How do we set someone up in a way that we know that, okay, all this work we've done together, when we say, okay, you're placed and we're in the follow-up stage, or we've completely exited someone, how do we ensure that their momentum is going to keep going upward, even if they do encounter some new challenges? Because, that's life, I believe, as Kim was saying before. Life is life, and sometimes life is going to give you some of those challenges. How do we keep the momentum going over the potholes that are going to happen for everyone invariably? And again, how do we ensure, broken record on a broken record here, that the process belongs to the participant at every stage of this process? Some things, some strategies we're going to introduce here. Experience-driven approaches. If that sounds like a very clinical way to say it, what's a great example of an experience-driven approach? Well, a registered apprenticeship is an experience-driven approach, right? And it's funny how being out there in the real world, getting my hands into this work, not talking in the abstract, do I think I could have success as this kind of engineer? No, we don't have to think about it anymore. Let's get in there and let's see what it's like. Let's do this work and then build my confidence, or make it clear to me that, like, wow, no, I do this at all. This is not going to work. So how do we use those experience-driven approaches, including but not limited to registered apprenticeship? Of course, we talked about trauma-informed. Of course, we talked about motivational interviewing. Of course, we've talked about mentorship and peer supports. And relevant to that notion of momentum down here, we're going to talk about resilience. How do we cultivate resiliency in the folks that we're working with? Again, so that we know that when they hit those potholes, because they're always going to be potholes, that the structure and the momentum are all resilient enough that they're going to hold together even amidst those different challenges. And again, talking in the abstract now, we're going to, as we introduce these ideas in the quote unquote real world, we're going to be doing it through case studies and through examples of, okay, this is what it looks like when we do this with Sarah, the recently transitioned veteran, or whoever else. So very much looking forward to getting into that good stuff. But to get to what all of us have been looking forward to, I would like to hand things back over to Kim, who is going to, as she introduced before, talk about this all important aspect. How do we evaluate what we're doing? How do we understand when we're being successful or when we could potentially be much more successful? Dr. Harris, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Mr. DiBiase, and always excited to talk about the role of evaluation in achieving the things that Cori talked about, right? Overall, we're talking about organizational success. And organizations are basically organizations are a compilation of people, and people come to us from different walks of life with different needs, and all with unique gifts, skills, and knowledge that they bring to make us more productive. So in exchange for that, in addition to that, we need to think about what are some of the things that could be impediments? We want to minimize those. And what are the things that could be facilitators? We want to accentuate those. We want to amplify those. And we want to make sure that it's not a happenstance situation, that is very much intentional and as systematic as it possibly can be. And evaluation is an essential tool in helping us to achieve just that. So as we're thinking about evaluation and design, it's really important. You've heard us talk about this before. As Cori said, if you've tuned in to some of our previous shows, then you know that we are we're very deliberate and intentional in talking about the role that evaluation plays in ensuring programmatic, operational, organizational success. And in so doing, we need to really be mindful of the fact that program evaluation must reflect the program design, meaning that we have to make sure that when we talk about assessment, evaluation, and measurement, and all the things that can come from that, different types of efficacy and the types of impact, we have to make sure that we are capturing data around the things that we really need to capture data around. So we need to make sure that program evaluation is occurring alongside programmatic design. And really, when we think about, there are several types of evaluation approaches, but two of the most common that you will see in this particular organizational setting, as we think about the workplace and as we think about apprenticeships, are process evaluations and outcome or impact evaluations. And in every type of evaluation, starting with the end in mind is very essential, right? Going back to what we just said a moment or two ago, we have to make sure that as we are thinking about the measurement, the value that is added, the efficacy or the effectiveness of a program, we need to know that a core component of that is knowing what were the main ingredients that we envisioned, that we intended to be part of that program. So awareness of place and space is definitely essential. And we need to know, and specifically if we're thinking about mentorship and other types of supports for apprenticeship success, we need to be mindful of how does the mentorship experience or similar experiences, how do they contribute to, how do they inform the outcomes that you are seeking or organizationally? And how do program design decisions affect anticipated outcomes? So how have you mapped it out? How have you crafted the program? How have you built it up? How have you designed it? And is it a logical conclusion based on that design that the outcomes that you're seeking should or would come from that? So as we're thinking about evaluation and its role, we definitely need to basically know the intent, right? Evaluation should explore specific program elements, right, in light of the purpose of the overall program. So we can be thinking of, a programmatic evaluation that's centered on the process, building it out and developing that process. So it could be a process evaluation that's more developmental, or we could be looking at or thinking about a program evaluation that we are conducting at the end of a run, right, of a particular program or a particular cohort of mentors going through a process. Or we could be looking at some combination of both. But it's important to have clearly articulated performance indicators. And we need to always be thinking about how are we modeling mentorship as a mediator. So how is the mentorship going to get us to those performance indicators? Which also means that we'll also have to have those indicators that really do a good job of defining the aims and the goals and the objectives that the particular program is crafted to serve and meet. So as we're thinking about this, we have some examples, and some of these might be familiar if you have been tuning in to some of the other webinars that we have put on. There are different things, right? We've talked about this. There are different ways in which program evaluation is essential and is of service to the initiatives, the programs that we have developed or are developing in our particular work in environment. So let's just take an example of a mentorship initiative. And the question that we're looking to answer is, does a mentorship initiative designed to increase classroom success and resiliency correlate to improvement in grade, student retention, and passing rates? So this would be an impact or an outcomes evaluation, because we want to know, are the outcomes that we intended, which would be better grades, students not attriting out, and passing rates, are we seeing that, right? So we would need to basically then, in order to be able to effectively measure that, we need to define these core constructs or these core things so that we can have a sense of, this is what we're saying and this is what we meant. And here is how the evaluation can help us to measure that particular achievement or to answer that particular question. So once again, just wanting to emphasize the importance of clarity around outcomes that are intended, definition of key terms that are shaping and defining the outcomes, and then alignment from an evaluation perspective. And then similarly, when we're thinking about other types of mentorship approaches and the purpose of those, you heard Cori talk about trauma-informed approaches where we are wanting to minimize harm, definitely not trying to re-traumatize. We're trying to cultivate and hold a safe space. We want to encourage agency, and those are the core components, let's say, for many trauma-informed approaches and programs. It is important that we then have an evaluation approach that is in service to those particular aims. So if we're talking about, for instance, mentors being trained on trauma-informed approaches such as avoiding that traumatization that I just mentioned, cultivating control, resiliency, and coping methods, the questions, or one of the questions that we may want to ask, one of those indicators may be, are all students given regular opportunities to express challenges and needs in relation to trauma and their perceptions of belonging and comfort and the like? And do participants report higher levels of perceived comfort, safety, and belonging? Let's break this particular set of questions down on the evaluation side. That overarching question is a process question, right? We know that we have particular aims that we're looking for this particular trauma-informed design to yield. So what we have to be able to evaluate are the steps along the way that should lead to those outcomes that we're seeking. And that second part of that question around the reporting of higher levels of perceived comfort, safety, and belonging should be the impact of that. Or sometimes it may be a little too early to call it a direct impact, but it could for sure be an outcome, right? Because let's say we need a couple of more rounds to determine if this thing really stuck, right? The first cohort, we may see some evidence of that. The second cohort, we may see some evidence of that. That may be a little bit closer to impact. But in that first cohort or that second cohort, if we're seeing outcomes that look a lot like what we anticipated or wanted, that may be those would definitely be the outcomes, and that may be an outcomes assessment or evaluation. But the key thing, the key takeaway to be mindful of is whether we're talking about a process evaluation, an outcomes evaluation, or an impact evaluation, transparency, co-creation is important. It's important to be thinking about, just as we're conceptualizing the design of the program, we also need to be conceptualizing the design of the evaluation to be in service to those programmatic aims. And then similarly, another example, thinking about this from the standpoint of another priority population that we will be discussing in this series of webinars, that of veterans. So it's some examples around veteran participation in STEM-oriented registered apprenticeship programs being paired with veteran professionals in that field. So one of the things that we, per the research and from different, as Cori talked about, research papers and literature that chronicles these types of programs and the outcomes that they have yielded for veterans and similar prioritized populations, is that we should be able to see a line, right, between the design and the setup of such a program, making sure that veterans have a community of more seasoned veterans who have also been in similar job fields as mentors or as sponsors or in some other supportive role. Then we should see, per the research, these veteran students saying that they feel more confident, supported, capable, that these things are also playing out in their ability to progress and advance in the work. Are we seeing that? That could be an example of an outcome or an impact evaluation. And really that differential there is just if we see this in cohort 1 through 2, 3 through 10 or what have you, then we can say there's definite impact going on there. If it's early days and we're seeing it in the first couple of cohorts, then we're definitely seeing outcome that hopefully is sticking and it'll turn into impact. But whether it's outcome, whether it's impact or something else, what we want to see, what we want to make sure is that we've constructed a means of evaluating the things that really matter for that program. And that part of what determines if it matters will be the priority population that we're prioritizing in that particular evaluation or for that particular program. So, wow, time goes by quickly. But that takes us to the end of this particular series. And we just want to, once again, just emphasize how excited we are to be journeying along with you, having this conversation. As we've stated before, we know that this is not exhaustive, but it is the beginning of so many different types of conversations that can come forth from these webinars. We truly hope that you will find this series that we are embarking upon to be very beneficial. And as always, we invite you enthusiastically to reach out to us. Our contact information is on the slide here in front of you. Please reach out to us with questions, curiosities, with any type of feedback. And please, as always, look out for our newsletter so that you can know what is going on within the world of apprenticeship as it pertains to the supply chain automation workforce hub. So we thank you very much for tuning in to this first installment, and we look forward to continuing the conversation in future installments.